Hello, this is Roman Gabriel, and you are listening to The Grilling Truth.
Welcome to another episode of The Grilling Truth, brought to you by Gridiron Mo, an interactive football app where you get to call what you think the offense or defense should do during a live NFL game. See what all other fans have called also. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster, and we have a very special guest today. When they mention the best coaches of the last 20, 30 years, they bring up Nick Saban, Urban Meyer. I think that we have maybe the most innovative coach of the last 30 years or so in college football with us. Helping welcome to the show the father of the air raid offense, Coach Hal Mumme.
Hey, thanks, Mike. I appreciate being here and appreciate that introduction. I always like being called a father. I usually get called a grandfather. So.
Yeah, I don't like that grandfather stuff. I became one a couple years ago. It's cool to have a grandkid, but when somebody calls you grandpa for the first time, it really makes you feel old.
Yeah. You kind of want to get called something else, but I appreciate it. So
I
to
never can get her to call me anything else, though. So. All right, now I know you were a really good football player. I know you played at Tarleton State, I think, in Texas. When did you first know that you wanted to be a football coach?
Oh, I knew that when I was about 9 or 10. I grew up around Texas high school football and watching Friday night games and all that. So that was kind of always my dream.
Now, was there anybody that you maybe played for when you were younger that kind of inspired you even more, and maybe a little bit of the way you coached when you got older?
I had a great junior college coach. I went to New Mexico Military Institute after getting placed there by the Naval Academy. I intended to go there to prep for a year and then go to Navy, but after I got there, I decided I really just wanted to be a football coach. I didn't want to be a career naval officer, so I played for a guy there named Bob Dennett, who's passed on now, but he was a great guy. He had coached Roger Staubach when Roger went there, and he loved the passing game. And we had, New Mexico military set up just like West Point. They have the same daily schedule and the whole works. And so you have a very limited amount of time for athletics. And so we'd practice for about an hour and a half a day. We'd throw the ball on almost every play, which was unheard of in the early 70s. And so I just enjoyed doing that. I knew I always wanted to coach it that way. I just had to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. All right, so tell us a little bit about your first couple jobs. I think you were a high school coach.
Yeah, I started out I graduated from Tarleton and started out at Moody High School in Corpus Christi, Texas, and I was the quarterback and receiver coach. And I did that for 3 years. The last year, I actually became the offensive coordinator. And we had a little bit of success, not a great amount. It was a tough school. It was a minority school in Corpus. We were about 92% Hispanic. So, football wasn't necessarily always the first thing the kids thought about when they woke up in the morning. A lot of them were just worried about how to eat. So it was a great learning experience for me. After 3 years of doing that, then I became the head coach at Aransas Pass, Texas, which is a little tiny 3A school down there. It's where you go to the beach if you go to Port Aransas, Texas. And then I stayed there one season, then I joined Bill Young's staff at West Texas State, which is now West Texas A&M. But in those days, West Texas State played a big-time schedule. We played Oklahoma State and Iowa State and UNLV and Baylor, and we played a pretty remarkable schedule for a little bitty school.
Yeah, and also, my big thing there is I know you didn't run the offense that you're known for today, and I know I read a lot about you. I know you want to tell us a little bit about your first meeting with Mouse Davis?
Yeah, sure. We had gone from WT. When we were at WT, I was there. I went there as the quarterback and receiver coach, and then when we went to UTEP, Coach Young promoted me to the offensive coordinator position. But I was challenged. I knew I wanted to throw the ball all the time. I just didn't know how to do it yet. And we were, when I, went to work for them, they were an I team and kind of a traditional I option power kind of offense. And when we got in the WAC, the old WAC, which is now pretty much the Mountain West, at BYU in there, and we had Air Force in Hawaii and all those schools. And BYU was throwing it around. They had Steve Young while I was there. Jim McMahon had just graduated. They had Robbie Bosco, and they won the national championship. So we started looking at, in that league, you had to figure out how to score more points than just having a traditional run the clock, early 80s kind of offense. So I started studying the BYU offense, and I really loved doing it. But at the same time that was happening, the USFL had started up, and Mouse Davis and June Jones and all those guys at the Houston Gamblers were lighting it up. And so after the first season, they sent Mouse out to scout. They played in the spring, so for the fall, they were out scouting games. So Mouse happened through El Paso looking for players, and he came by, and I asked him if I could spend some time on the board with him when he came by, and he was very gracious and spent on an entire day with me. We probably spent 6 or 7 hours in there listening to him. Basically, he taught me the whole run and shoot offense in one setting. And we had tried to incorporate some of it to what we were doing there. But, the best thing that happened to me in my career is we got fired at UTEP.
Yeah, and that's when you got to finally start implementing what you wanted. You got a high school job where you could do that. And I've read all kinds of stories about you going to BYU, sitting in with their coaches there, Lavelle Edwards, who was a great coach. You tell us a little bit about what you learned while at BYU. And is it true that you were driving like 900 miles just to get there to do that?
Oh, yeah. First few times we did it, we drove from Copperas Cove, Texas to Provo, Utah. I don't know how long that is, but it's a long ways. And I'd go twice a year. We went up there in the spring. We watched spring practice, and then I'd take my son, Matthew, who now is the head coach at LaGrange College in Georgia, but in those days he was a wannabe 7th grade quarterback. And I'd take Matt to their summer camp in the summer up there. So we'd go twice a year, and I'd put in the stuff that I got in their spring practice. We'd come back and have our spring practice in May in Copperas Cove, and so I'd put in the stuff I learned and then go back in the summer and tweak it.
All right, and then you eventually got a college job at NAI school, Iowa Wesleyan. You want to tell us a little bit about that time there and when you first met Coach Mike Leach?
Well, we had I was at Copperas Cove, and I was sitting around the office. We had just beat Georgetown High School in the last game of the year and had not a great year there, but for Cove it was a good year. And I had a lot of kids coming back, and I was trying to figure out how to, win some of these games the next year. We played in a great district there. It was one of the, if you've ever seen Friday Night Lights, it was a lot like that. And I get this phone call from a guy named Steve Kazar, who's a great friend of mine. He's now the head of college scouting for the Rams. But at the time, he was the special teams coach for Mike Ditka at the Bears. And he says, hey, I ran across your resume. Do you want to be a head coach in college? And I said, yeah, I'm running this. We got this new offense everybody likes. I'd like to try it out at that level. So he said, well, Iowa Wesleyan is looking for a head football coach. They can't find it. They've tried to get it's not a very good job, and they can't get anybody. And so I thought about you, and I thought I'd see if you wanted to do it. And so I said yes, and he said, well, he told me what to write. And I wrote this little handwritten note to the president. And then, a couple months later, I was the head coach at Iowa Wesleyan. Well, they hadn't won a game in 2 years. The way it boiled down was the reason they hired a high school coach from Texas because they couldn't get any high school coaches in Iowa to take it. It was a really bad job. And they had no facilities and no players, and they had, like I said, they had won in 2 years, so it was a tough situation.
Yeah, I think when you got there, I heard you only had like 10 or 12 players.
No, we had 2.
2? Okay, so it was even worse than what I heard. Yeah,
we brought I actually had recruited a few guys that wanted to transfer with me, kids that I coached in high school, and about 3 or 4 of them came with me. We actually brought more players to the first team meeting than there were there. And And so Mike Major was my defensive coordinator, and he gets in the car and goes recruiting. Well, he had been my defense coordinator at Cobbers Cove, and then I was going to hire the offense coordinator from there too, but he couldn't afford to take the pay cut because he had a family and he'd been a long-time Texas high school coach. And so we had a job open, and I started looking around for somebody to be the offensive line coach for me, and I wanted somebody smart that hadn't necessarily been an O-line coach, because what we did was so dramatically different than the way most people taught offensive line play in those days that I wanted somebody that was smart and was open to the ideas. And it's hard to find a line coach who's real set in his ways that would have been open to 2-point stances and wide splits. So I get this resume in the mail, and the first thing I see at the top of it is guys from BYU. So it immediately catches my eye. And I read down, and you know, you realize Mike Leach was the guy, and I realized, you know, he didn't play at BYU, but he went to school there, and so I just called him up and I started talking to him. It was obvious he and I kind of shared the same love of what BYU had done through the years, and I said, well, that's the kind of offense we're going to run here, and so he was very interested in coming. And at the time, he was the coaching the defensive ends at College of the Desert. And as I recall, they were paying him something like $6,000 a year, and he had to watch the rec gym to do it. So the job at Wesleyan paid $12,000, and he had to wear a lot of hats. And since he had a law degree, they let him teach business law at night. And then we hired Sharon, his wife, to be our football secretary. So that's how they could afford to live there and do it. But he and I, that's how we joined forces at Wesleyan. And Mike came on board, did a fabulous job coaching the O-line and recruiting and doing all that. And he really, you could tell, you know, he's just a brilliant guy. He caught on to what we were doing real fast. And you know, in a very short period of time, just several months, I mean, I didn't even worry about the offensive line. I just quit going to their meetings because I knew he was so good. Yeah.
All right, now here's a question for you. You talk about the 2-point stance. A lot of head injuries, concussion problems. Do you think that one thing that could help that would be making it mandatory for offensive linemen to be in 2-point stances?
I'm not for making a lot of stuff mandatory. I don't really think.
Neither am I, but you know what I mean. I mean, I've heard a lot of guys bring it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a guy who likes changing the game much. I mean, I think we've got a great game the way we do. I think the best thing we can do for concussions is the way we tackle and our equipment. I think our equipment has to change. Our equipment. Yeah,
and I think the one thing the Seattle Seahawks do with the rugby tackling, I think, is something everybody.
To me, that's the best thing that's been done for concussions in the last few years. And if you watch us, and we do it here at Belhaven, it made our defense a lot better. You can't say it doesn't work because the Seahawks did it and Ohio State did it, and both of them won championships. So we put it in here at Belhaven. It made us a lot better. I think that is the best thing we can do. But we've got to raise up a generation of kids that understand that that's the way you tackle, not these guys that want to be heat-seeking missiles and lead with their head. And the kids are doing it right now. We're trying to legislate it by having all these rules about targeting and all that. And to me, I think that promotes targeting more than it stops it. I think it's kind of like the Civil War. You had in the Civil War, you had these horrendous casualties because you had the beginnings of 20th century equipment coupled with 19th century tactics.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what's happened to our football game is since in the last 20 years, we've had these old tactics in terms of tackling, but we've got equipment that's so much lighter, and we've got players that are so much faster. I just think we need to make the pads softer, particularly the shoulder pads.
Well, when you get down to it, when you got 300-pound men coming at each other full speed, I mean, nothing good's going to come of it. But if you can take the head out of it as much as you can.
But I've studied this rugby stuff a lot, and Mike Leach knows some of the guys that are part of the New England or the New Zealand All Blacks, which is probably the best